The wizarding world is not only spells cast in shadows and castles rising against the sky. It is also rules woven into parchment, councils gathered in candlelight, and a ministry hidden deep beneath London that shapes the lives of every witch and wizard. For as long as magic has been practiced, there have been questions of order, of secrecy, of what it means to live with power unseen by those without it. Tonight we will drift through the long and winding history of wizarding laws and the ministry of magic, from the first whispered codes to the great statutes that shaped centuries, each moment part of a tapestry that defines how witches and wizards live today. And before we sink further into this slow telling, let me invite you into the same gentle rhythm that so many share. If this quiet journey into the history of magic brings you a little rest, you may choose to remain, perhaps even subscribe, but only if it truly soothes you. Share in the comments where you are listening from and what hour it is there. It feels almost like magic to know that across distant places, others are closing their eyes to the same story, carried together for a moment by the echo of Harry Potter's world. The very first laws of magic were not written by quills in ink, but spoken traditions passed among clans of witches and wizards who lived scattered across Britain. In a time when superstition ruled Muggle villages, magic was both feared and revered, seen as blessing and curse. Early wizarding families created their own rules to survive. Some declared that their gifts must never be shown in public. Others set dueling codes, agreements of honor, meant to restrain reckless use of spells. These beginnings were fragile, shaped more by fear of discovery than by justice. As magical communities grew, the need for greater order became clear. Local councils formed, gatherings where disputes were settled and punishments agreed upon. If a wizard bewitched a neighbor's crops, or if a spell harmed livestock, there had to be consequence. These councils were the first steps toward a system that would eventually become the Wizengamot, the great court of wizarding Britain. Their laws were uneven, their judgments harsh, yet they planted the seed of governance, showing that even those who could wield power beyond measure still needed rules to live together. Muggle suspicion grew sharper in these early centuries. Witch hunts spread through villages, tortures and fear chasing those who revealed too much. For every magical family that kept hidden, another was exposed. It became clear that survival demanded secrecy, and secrecy demanded law. So began the long journey toward the greatest statute in wizarding history, the International Statute of Secrecy, which would not come until the late 17th century. But its roots were here, in these fragile beginnings, where the first whispers of law promised safety in silence. In the centuries before the ministry, wizarding law was patchwork, scattered across families and councils, enforced not by auras, but by communities determined to protect themselves. Yet even in this uncertainty, the foundation was laid. Rules for wands, rules for duels, rules for the treatment of muggles and creatures alike. Some were cruel, some unjust, yet they marked the beginning of order, the first shaping of a world that would one day be governed from deep beneath London by the Ministry of Magic. Long before the ministry stood beneath London, the heart of wizarding law beat within the chamber of the Wizengamot. This body, older than any single office, was both court and council, a gathering of witches and wizards who judged disputes and decided rules. Its name, echoing with weight, comes from the old word for assembly, and for centuries it carried the authority of wizarding Britain, shaping justice when no central government yet existed. The Wizengamot was not a body of elected leaders, but of the powerful and respected families whose names carried weight, witches and wizards who held influence through wealth, knowledge, or magical skill. To be called to its circle was both honor and burden, for its rulings touched every aspect of magical life. They set the codes of dueling, declaring what curses could be cast, and what punishments followed if one struck to kill. They established early limits on the use of charms in public, ensuring that Muggles would not easily glimpse magic. They judged crimes of theft, cruelty, and betrayal, though their justice often favored the influential over the weak. Yet even in its imperfection, the Wizengamot became symbol of order. Its chamber, hung with tapestries of silver and purple, held trials where voices clashed and verdicts were declared. For those accused of dark magic, its judgment was feared. For those seeking fairness, it was sometimes the only hope. The Wizengamot grew into the highest court of wizarding Britain, and though centuries have passed, it remains part of the ministry's structure today, its roots stretching back to these early days of gathering. Many famous trials were held within its walls long before the time of Voldemort. Wizards accused of revealing themselves to Muggles faced censure, their wands broken, their names struck from registries. Disputes between magical families were brought forward, sometimes ending in peace, sometimes in rivalry that smoldered for generations. Laws regarding magical creatures were shaped here, though often harshly, placing centaurs and goblins under wizard authority, rather than granting true equality. The Wizengamot reflected the prejudices of its members, and yet it also reflected the wizarding world's attempt to impose structure on chaos. It was from the Wizengamot that the ministry itself would grow. In time, it became clear that trials and councils alone were not enough. Magical society had expanded, its needs greater, its secrecy more fragile. The Statute of Secrecy loomed on the horizon, and when it came, it would demand not only law, but enforcement, not only judgment, but administration. The Wizengamot could not stand alone. It was seed that would give rise to a government, and though its chamber still echoes with voices today, its greatest legacy was in shaping the path toward the Ministry of Magic. The question rests softly. Was the Wizengamot more court than council, more justice or politics? Was it true fairness or only the voice of the powerful shaping law for their own ends? Perhaps it was both, for in every age the law reflects those who write it. Yet even with its flaws, it was the first great body of wizarding law, the circle of witches and wizards who ensured that magic would not be only chaos but order bound by words and wands alike. In this imagining, we picture the old chamber, torches flickering on stone walls, robed figures gathered in solemn rows, voices echoing against the stone as verdicts are declared. No ministry yet exists, no statute of secrecy yet written, but here lies the foundation of wizarding law, where justice first learned to speak in the magical world. In the centuries before the Ministry of Magic was founded, wizarding law was shaped in fragments, its rules carried by word of mouth, its judgments handed down by the Wizengamot and local councils. Many of these early laws concerned not only witches and wizards, but the creatures who shared the magical world with them. For it was never enough to govern only human magic. The question of how to treat centaurs, goblins, werewolves, and house elves lingered like shadow in every debate, shaping laws that revealed as much about prejudice as about justice. The first attempts at regulation were crude. Goblins, skilled in metalwork and finance, were mistrusted by wizarding families who relied on their banks yet feared their independence. Laws were written to restrict their rights, forbidding them from carrying wands and denying them positions in wizarding councils. These restrictions, meant to maintain wizard authority, fueled rebellions that shook the wizarding world across centuries. Each uprising was met with force, and each ended in uneasy compromise. But the laws remained largely unchanged. The legacy of mistrust between goblins and wizards was born not from difference alone, but from rules written to bind one group beneath another. Centaurs, too, were treated with suspicion. Their wisdom was great, their knowledge of the stars deep, but wizarding law declared them beings rather than beasts. Without ever granting them full equality, they were left to their forests, their voices absent from councils, their autonomy respected only when it kept them apart. Laws forbade wizards from encroaching on their lands, yet offered no path for centaurs to share in governance. The divide grew sharp, a reminder that wizarding law often reflected fear of what could not be controlled. House elves suffered most quietly. Bound to families by magic older than written codes, their servitude was rarely questioned. Early laws did not grant them freedom, but rather enforced the ties of enchantment that kept them obedient. Their labor was assumed, their loyalty demanded, their voices ignored. It would take centuries before one elf's act of defiance and one boy's kindness would challenge that silence. But in these early years, law looked upon house elves not as beings with rights, but as property, their freedom dismissed as unthinkable. Werewolves, feared for the danger of their transformations, faced laws that were harsh and unforgiving. Registration was demanded, restrictions placed upon movement, punishments sharp for those who failed to comply. Many were driven into hiding, their lives marked by secrecy and distrust. Few protections were offered, and many laws served only to isolate further those already condemned by curse. Injustice disguised as safety shaped their lives, leaving scars that carried through generations. These early laws revealed the truth that wizarding justice was not always fair. It was born in fear, sharpened by mistrust, and written often by those who held power, not those who suffered its weight. Yet even within these harsh beginnings lay the seeds of debate. For voices were raised, however small, that questioned whether prejudice was wisdom or cruelty. The Wizengamot itself became stage for such disputes, its verdicts shaping centuries of tension between wizards and those who shared the magical world with them. The question lingers softly. Was law in these early days protection or oppression? Was it shield to guard secrecy or chain to bind those deemed lesser? Perhaps it was both, for law reflects the fears of its makers as much as their hopes. And in the shadows of these rulings, the wizarding world grew, its councils learning slowly that justice without fairness is no justice at all. In this imagining, we picture parchment curling with ink, names written in old script, laws declaring what creatures may not do, who may not hold wands, who must remain silent. The ink is dark, the voices absent, the judgments uneven, yet these parchments, fragile and unfair, are the first threads of wizarding law, threads that will one day be rewoven into something more lasting. Before the Ministry of Magic stood as guardian of wizarding secrecy, witches and wizards lived among Muggles with little division. In the earliest centuries, spells were woven openly, charms whispered in cottages, potions sold in marketplaces beside bread and cloth. For many years, magic and non-magic coexisted uneasily, with wonder and fear mingling in every village. Yet as time passed, mistrust deepened, and the path towards secrecy became not choice but necessity, and the laws that followed began to shape the hidden world we know today. The tension with Muggles was never simple. At times, wizards were healers, their potions curing sickness, their charms protecting homes from storms. At other times, fear of their power led to suspicion, whispers of witchcraft spreading like fire. Muggle rulers demanded explanations for strange events, and priests declared magic the work of darkness. Laws of the non-magical world grew harsher, punishing those suspected of sorcery with fire and rope. Though flames could not harm true witches and wizards, exposure carried danger, for secrecy broken in one place could spread to another, and soon entire communities trembled. Wizarding councils began to respond. Local codes were written, urging wizards to hide their gifts, to cast spells unseen, to live quietly beside neighbors who could not know. Yet not all agreed. Some argued that wizards should rule, that hiding was shameful, that their gifts were meant for power. Others urged caution, fearing that Muggle numbers and weapons, though weak against magic, could overwhelm by sheer force. The Wizengamot became stage for these debates, its rulings shifting as fear of exposure grew sharper. By the 15th and 16th centuries, witch hunts spread across Europe with fury. Muggles carried torches, accused neighbors, and built pyres in town squares. Wizards, though immune to flames, could not always escape suspicion. Families fled deeper into forests, villages vanished overnight, entire lines of wizards erased from public life. It became clear that survival required more than scattered councils. It required law strong enough to bind all witches and wizards into secrecy, no matter their pride or ambition. The earliest drafts of such laws began here. Codes declared that spells should not be cast before Muggles, that magical creatures should be hidden or disguised, that enchantments must be used to protect secrecy rather than expose it. The improper use of magic office, though not yet named, was imagined in these first attempts, its spirit already alive in the rules passed by councils and enforced by peers. Still, opposition remained. Some families resisted, clinging to old power, showing themselves to Muggles as rulers or gods. These families were often the first to fall, destroyed by mobs or betrayed by their own kind. Others turned to darkness, believing secrecy a weakness, their defiance laying roots for the conflicts that would one day shape the rise of dark wizards like Grindelwald and Voldemort. The question rests softly. Was secrecy an act of wisdom or surrender? Was it protection that preserved the wizarding world, or fear that bound it into hiding? Perhaps it was both, for in every age, the line between survival and retreat is thin. What is clear is that without secrecy, the wizarding world could not have endured. And so the stage was set for the Great Statute of 1692, the law that would shape every generation that followed. In this imagining, we see villages lit by torches, witches slipping quietly into night, councils whispering of rules that might save them. The parchment is rough, the ink uneven, but the words carry weight. The promise of safety, the birth of secrecy as law. By the 17th century, the wizarding world stood at breaking point. Muggle suspicion had grown into frenzy. Witch hunts consuming entire regions, courts filled with accusations, fires burning in towns across Europe. Though witches and wizards could protect themselves, the cost of constant flight and secrecy grew heavier. It became clear that survival required more than scattered councils and whispered codes. It required a single binding law that would separate the magical and non-magical worlds completely. From this need, after years of debate, came the International Statute of Secrecy of The debates before its creation were fierce. Some argued that secrecy was surrender, that wizards should reveal themselves and rule, their power too great to hide. Others believed that peace with Muggles was possible, that education and trust could bridge the divide. Yet, the voices of caution grew louder, pointing to the endless hunts, the fear in every village, the deaths of families caught in suspicion. The Wizengamot listened, councils from other countries joined, and slowly, a consensus formed. To survive, wizards must vanish from Muggle sight. The statute was sweeping. It declared that magical governments across the world must conceal their existence, each nation responsible for its own secrecy. Magical schools were hidden, communities disguised, creatures concealed or relocated. Dragons were moved to remote valleys, giants driven into mountains, and entire villages were cloaked by enchantments. Wizards living among Muggles were ordered to conceal their powers, to blend with their neighbors, to live double lives if they wished to remain. Enforcement was strict. The creation of dedicated offices ensured that breaches of secrecy were punished. Obliviators, trained to erase memories were tasked with repairing accidents. The improper use of magic office was given greater authority, ensuring that spells cast before Muggles would not go unchallenged. Fines, confiscations, and even imprisonment were imposed on those who ignored the statute. For the first time, wizarding law stretched across nations, binding magical communities under a single principle: secrecy above all. Not all accepted it easily. Families proud of blood and power resisted, claiming that hiding was shameful. Some fled to remote places where they could rule in isolation, their disdain for the statute echoing through generations. Goblins, centaurs, and other beings watched as wizards pulled away from Muggles, their own lives shaped by new rules that restricted them further. The statute solved one problem, but deepened others. For secrecy protected wizards, yet reinforced divisions that would never heal. And yet, without it, the wizarding world might not have survived. For centuries, Muggle history spoke less of witches and wizards, their memories erased, their encounters dismissed as superstition. The fires of the hunts dimmed. The fear of sorcery faded into legend. Wizards lived hidden, their lives safe, their children raised in schools unseen, their government able to grow in peace. The question lingers quietly. Was the statute triumph or retreat? Was it victory of wisdom or failure of courage? Did it preserve freedom or bind magic in chains of silence? Perhaps it was both. For secrecy saved lives, but narrowed horizons. Wizards were safe, but no longer free to share their world. In this imagining, the year is 1692. Quills scratch across parchment, signatures of leaders binding their people to silence. The ink dries, the statute is sealed, and across the world witches and wizards fade into shadows, their presence hidden, their stories told only in whispers. The separation is complete, and the age of secrecy begins. When the ink of the International Statute of Secrecy dried in 1692, the wizarding world entered a new age. For the first time, the separation between magical and non-magical life was not only tradition but law, binding across nations. Yet to write a law is one thing, and to enforce it is another. In the decades that followed, witches and wizards faced the challenge of living unseen, and the structures of enforcement grew into the foundations of the ministry itself. The first task was concealment. Villages long known for magic were hidden beneath charms, their cottages blurred to wandering eyes, their people shielded by enchantments of misdirection. Castles were cloaked, forests bewitched, rivers charmed so that Muggles who stumbled too close would find themselves turned away, confused and forgetting why they came. Great magical places such as Hogsmeade became models of concealment, thriving in secrecy, their streets alive with magic, yet invisible to all who did not belong. The second task was response. Magic is unpredictable, and breaches of secrecy were inevitable. A wizard's temper in a tavern, a misfired spell in a crowded street, a creature escaping its keeper, each threatened exposure. Thus the office of obliviators grew in importance. These witches and wizards were trained not in battle but in subtlety, their spells erasing memories with precision. To Muggles, strange events became dreams, accidents, or confusion, their minds gently rewritten to preserve the secret world beside them. Punishments were strict. Those who defied the statute faced heavy consequence. Fines were common, wands confiscated in more serious cases, and in the gravest instances imprisonment in Azkaban. The law demanded silence, and silence was kept with iron hand. Families who flaunted their magic among Muggles were shunned, or worse, their names struck from records, their children watched with suspicion. The wizarding world had chosen secrecy, and it would not allow defiance to undo it. Yet enforcement was uneven. Wealthy families, skilled in influence, often escaped harsher punishments. Those of lesser standing suffered more, their mistakes judged without mercy. Creatures, too, bore the brunt of the statute. Centaurs retreated deeper into forests, giants driven into mountains, goblins confined by restrictions that cut them from Muggle commerce. The law preserved wizards but widened divides with all others, the shadow of prejudice written into every clause. Despite its flaws, the statute worked. Witch hunts dwindled, Muggle courts turned away from accusations of sorcery, and magic slipped into legend rather than history. The fires burned lower, the whispers grew softer, and by the 18th century, witches and wizards could live with greater peace. The wizarding world remained hidden, its children growing in schools unseen, its laws written in chambers where no Muggle eye could follow. The question rests quietly. Was the statute shield or wall? Did it preserve freedom by hiding it, or steal it away by binding magic in silence? Perhaps it was both, for safety always comes at cost. Yet in those early years, when fear still lingered in every village, the cost seemed worth the price. The wizarding world had chosen to vanish, and in vanishing it survived. In this imagining we see cloaked figures in the night, casting charms across fields, wiping memories from frightened villagers, building a wall of secrecy brick by unseen brick. The parchment of law becomes living barrier, and the world of magic slips quietly into shadow, unseen, unknown, enduring. Before the Ministry of Magic came into being, Wizarding Britain was guided by the Wizards' Council, a body that grew out of the old Wizengamot and carried the authority to create and enforce laws. For centuries it served as central authority, but as the world grew larger and secrecy more complex, the council faltered. Its decline opened the path for something stronger, something more structured, that could govern the magical community with greater reach. The Wizards' Council was never fully democratic. Membership leaned heavily toward wealthy pureblood families, its decisions reflecting the interests of those who held land, wealth, and influence. For many years this was accepted, for wizarding society was small, and those with power often commanded respect. Yet as laws multiplied after the Statute of Secrecy, the weaknesses of the council became clear. It lacked departments, lacked organized offices, and often failed to enforce its own rulings beyond the walls of its chamber. Scandals deepened its decline. Some members were accused of taking bribes to ignore breaches of secrecy. Others turned blind eye to the abuses of influential families, punishing smaller households while sparing the powerful. Tensions with goblins and other magical beings grew worse, rebellions flaring when fair treatment was denied. The council's inability to manage Met's crises revealed its limits. By the end of the 17th century, many witches and wizards whispered that the Wizards' Council was no longer capable of leading them. The International Statute of Secrecy of 1692 made change inevitable. Its demands were too great for a loose council to handle. To enforce the statute required entire branches of authority, obliviators to rewrite memories, regulators to oversee creatures, inspectors to punish magical misuse. A body that met only in chambers could not manage a hidden society of thousands. The need for a proper government, staffed daily, with departments and leadership, became undeniable. Thus began the transition. The Wizengamot continued as court, judging trials and disputes, while the broader responsibilities of governance were shifted slowly into new offices. These offices formed the skeleton of what would become the ministry. In 1707, the Wizards' Council was officially dissolved, and the Ministry of Magic was established under the leadership of the First Minister, Ulic Gam. From that moment, Wizarding Britain no longer depended on gatherings of nobles and elders, but on a government that mirrored in its secrecy the structure of Muggle ministries, though with purposes entirely magical. The decline of the council is remembered less as collapse than as transformation. Its chamber did not vanish, for the Wizengamot still sits in judgment today, but its role as ruler ended, its power absorbed into the ministry, its history becoming foundation rather than crown. The question lingers softly: did the Wizards' Council fail because it was corrupt, or because the world outgrew it? Was it weakness of its members, or the burden of secrecy too great for a small body to bear? Perhaps both, for history shows that law must grow as people grow, and no council, however noble, can rule forever in the same way. In this imagining, we see the last meetings of the Wizards' Council. Old robes hang heavy, voices argue in tired circles, parchments pile unanswered. Beyond the chamber, the world waits, secrecy demanding more than words, justice demanding more than tradition, and so the council fades, and the Ministry of Magic takes its place, a government born from both necessity and failure. In the year 1707, the Wizards' Council gave way to a new order. The Ministry of Magic was founded, a government built not from tradition alone, but from structure, departments, and authority meant to endure. The first Minister of Magic was Ulick Gamp, a figure remembered less for brilliance than for the challenge of holding together a society in transition. His task was immense, for secrecy had become law, magical society had grown restless, and the failures of the council still lingered in memory. The new ministry was modeled in part on Muggle governance, though always hidden from them. It had a single head, the minister, with authority to appoint leaders of departments beneath him. These departments grew out of the needs sharpened by the statute of secrecy, law enforcement, regulation of magical creatures, international cooperation, accidents, and catastrophes. Each took shape slowly, their offices small at first, their responsibilities often overlapping, but the structure was clear. For the first time, Wizarding Britain had a true government, not only court and council, but administration with daily reach. Ulick Gamp's tenure was marked by difficulty. He faced constant tension with goblins, whose rebellions demanded compromise as much as suppression. He struggled to balance the demands of pure-blood families, who sought to control the new government, with the needs of the wider wizarding community. Enforcement of secrecy was uneven, and breaches were common in the early years. Yet his persistence laid foundation that would endure, and though his name is not celebrated as some later ministers, he is remembered as the one who carried Wizarding Britain across the fragile bridge between council and ministry. The first years of the ministry were filled with trial and error. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement was small, its auras few, their training unrefined. The improper use of magic office relied more on reports than patrols, its reach limited. International contacts were fragile, as each nation struggled to enforce secrecy in its own way. Yet slowly the ministry grew, its offices expanding beneath London, its power accepted as necessity rather than experiment. The Wizengamot remained, not as ruler, but as court, its chamber continuing to judge trials under the ministry's roof. This balance of government and court gave structure that endures even now, with the Wizengamot's authority tied to law and the minister's office tied to leadership. In the centuries that followed, ministers rose and fell, some remembered with respect, others with disdain. Yet the ministry itself endured, its departments multiplying, its reach extending into every aspect of magical life. The founding of the ministry was more than bureaucratic reform. It was the birth of Wizarding Britain as we know it, the shaping of a world hidden but organized, fragile but resilient. From its offices beneath London, quills scratched laws that would define centuries. Memos flew between departments, and witches and wizards learned to look not to councils but to government. The question lingers softly: was the ministry born from progress or from fear? Was it structure to protect or control to restrain? Perhaps both, for secrecy and law demand order, and order demands sacrifice. The Wizards' Council had faltered, but the Ministry promised strength, a promise that would be tested in every war to come. In this imagining, the year is 1707. A new office is opened beneath the city, candles lit, parchments laid upon desks. Ulic Gamp, weary but resolute, begins the work of shaping a government. Outside, the wizarding world watches, uncertain but hopeful. The Ministry of Magic has been born, and history takes its next step. After Ulic Gamp set the foundation of the ministry, the office of Minister of Magic passed into new hands, each leader carrying the heavy burden of secrecy and governance in a world still learning to adapt. These early ministers were not remembered for triumph alone, but for the struggles they faced in shaping the fragile government into something lasting. Their names echo faintly in wizarding history, often overshadowed by later wars and famous figures, yet their work built the framework that would carry the ministry for centuries. One of Gamp's immediate successors was Damocles Raoul, whose tenure is remembered darkly. Raoul believed in secrecy above all, enforcing it with harshness that bordered on cruelty. He expanded Azkaban as prison for those who broke magical law, its dementors employed not only as guards, but as instruments of punishment. Fear kept many in line, but resentment grew, for his methods punished small accidents as harshly as great crimes. Families whispered of injustice, and though secrecy was preserved, trust in the ministry dimmed. Next came Perseus Parkinson, whose leadership shifted toward appeasement of influential families. Parkinson was known for bending to the will of pure-blood houses, allowing them greater sway in ministry decisions. His years in office were marked by stagnation, for laws favored the powerful while leaving ordinary witches and wizards unprotected. Yet his time revealed a pattern that would repeat through history, that the ministry often bent beneath the weight of those with wealth and influence, its neutrality fragile, its fairness uncertain. Not all early ministers failed. Some, though less remembered, brought small measures of stability. Eldritch Diggory, ancestor of the later Diggory family, served with reputation for fairness. He sought reforms to improve conditions for magical creatures and pushed for stricter oversight of dark magic. Though his life ended in office, his legacy carried seeds of compassion, rare in those years, a reminder that the ministry could be not only shield of secrecy but instrument of justice. Through these early decades, the ministry struggled to balance three constant pressures. First was secrecy, the need to enforce the statute against all breaches, no matter how small. Second was control, the temptation of pure-blood families to shape the government to their will. Third was justice, the demand of ordinary witches and wizards to be governed fairly, not by fear or favoritism. Few ministers managed to balance all three, and so history of this era is filled with missteps, rebellions, and gradual reform, rather than triumph. The offices of the ministry themselves grew during this time. Departments expanded, orders became better trained, and records grew more detailed. For the first time, witches and wizards had registries for wands, lists of magical creatures, archives of magical lore. The bureaucracy deepened, quills scratching day and night, memos flying between offices. The ministry became not only government but machine, slow and imperfect, yet steady enough to endure. The question lingers, were these early ministers builders of stability or servants of fear? Were they visionaries or merely caretakers of a fragile order? Perhaps both, for survival required harshness, but endurance required patience. Their names are faint in memory, their achievements buried in parchment, yet without them, the ministry could not have grown beyond fragile beginnings. In this imagining, the corridors beneath London echo with new footsteps, ministers rising and falling, quill-scratching laws that few will remember. The work is slow, the victories small, the failures heavy, but brick by unseen brick, the ministry is built, not by legends but by weary leaders who struggled to hold the Etty world together. The Ministry of Magic was not born in grandeur, but in necessity. In its earliest years, its offices were scattered, small chambers hidden in old wizarding buildings, meetings held in borrowed halls, records stored in cramped archives. But as secrecy deepened and lore expanded, the ministry needed a true home, a place vast enough to house its growing departments, yet hidden from Muggle eyes. Thus began the expansion of its underground headquarters, a labyrinth beneath the streets of London that would grow into the center of wizarding governance for centuries to come. Construction was itself a feat of magic. Muggle workmen in London noticed nothing. The charms of distraction and concealment guided them away from the sight. Wizards tunneled deep, shaping chambers with spells that bent stone without cracking, enlarging corridors without collapsing earth. Enchantments layered the walls, preventing sound from rising, disguising the movement of hundreds of witches and wizards who would one day walk there daily. It was not only office but fortress, guarded by secrecy stronger than stone. At first, the ministry's underground home was modest. A central atrium opened into a handful of corridors, each lined with simple offices. The Wizengamot chamber was placed at its heart, a reminder that law and justice still guided the work. Departments occupied wings that were far smaller than the sprawling offices they would later become. Yet, even then, the seeds of growth were present, each corridor ready to stretch further, each chamber built with enchantments that could expand as needed. Over the next century, expansion never ceased. New halls were carved for the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, auras training in rooms that shifted size for dueling practice. The Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures built vaults to study and contain beasts too dangerous for open spaces. The Department of International Magical Cooperation raised conference chambers where foreign envoys could gather without fear of exposure. Each addition was hidden beneath the city, unseen, unknown, yet vast enough to house thousands. The ministry's design mirrored its purpose. The grand atrium, with its golden statues of wizard, witch, house elf, goblin, and centaur, was meant to suggest unity, though the reality was often less kind. Its fireplaces linked directly to the Flu network, allowing employees and visitors to arrive unseen. Its lifts rattled between levels, carrying memos that folded into paper airplanes, a symbol of bureaucracy, alive even in magic. Its chambers stretched downward, level after level, until at the deepest lay the Department of Mysteries, shrouded in silence. For witches and wizards who visited, the underground headquarters became symbol as much as building. To walk its atrium was to feel the presence of law and power, to know that one stood at the center of hidden governance. To work there was to belong to the machinery of secrecy, part of the system that preserved the wizarding world. The ministry became not only a place of law, but of identity, its underground halls binding magical Britain as surely as any spell. The question lingers softly. Was the ministry's hidden home symbol of safety or of distance? Was it fortress that protected magic or cage that locked it away beneath earth and stone? Perhaps it was both, for secrecy demands walls, and walls demand sacrifice. Yet within those walls, wizarding law found permanence, a home that endures still. In this imagining, we walk the atrium, candles glowing against polished stone, the golden fountain gleaming, the chatter of quills and footsteps echoing through endless corridors. Above, Muggles hurry across London streets, unaware that beneath their feet lies entire government, vast and alive, unseen yet enduring. At the heart of the ministry, more feared and respected than any other office, stood the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. It was born in the earliest days of the ministry, for secrecy demanded not only rules, but those who could enforce them. From modest beginnings, it grew into the largest department, the arm of authority that reached into every corner of Wizarding Britain, its aurors and officers carrying both wand and law wherever breaches occurred. In its earliest years, the department was small. A few witches and wizards were tasked with tracking down breaches of secrecy, punishing illegal spells, and dueling those who defied law. They were not yet called aurors, but enforcers, their training rough, their methods improvised. Over time, the role sharpened, and the Aura Office was established, dedicated to catching dark wizards and defending society from threats too great for ordinary law. The Auras became the ministry's soldiers, their training intense, their courage tested in every mission. They learned defensive and offensive spells alike, studied concealment, interrogation, and the use of charms to track fugitives. Many fell in their duty, for the work was dangerous, but those who succeeded became symbols of wizarding strength. From these ranks would one day come figures like Mad-Eye Moody, legendary for vigilance, and Kingsley Shacklebolt, who guided the ministry through its darkest hours. Beside the auras, the department had expanded into other branches. The improper use of magic office investigated minor breaches, from children casting spells outside school to careless witches enchanting Muggle objects. The misuse of Muggle artifacts office, once small and often ridiculed, grew into key role, for enchanted items could expose magic as surely as any spell. The Wizengamot Administration Services managed records and trials, their quills recording the fate of countless accused. Together, these offices formed a network that governed not only great crimes but the smallest details of magical life. Yet, the department was not free of flaw. Corruption lingered in its ranks, favoritism shaping trials, prejudice bending law. Auras, though respected, were sometimes feared. Their authority heavy, their power unchecked. Trials in the Wizengamot chamber were often swift, their judgments influenced by politics. The department reflected not only justice, but the imperfections of those who served within it. For wizarding law, like all law, was written and enforced by hands that carried both wisdom and bias. In times of peace, the Department of Magical Law Enforcement kept order, its officers chasing smugglers of dangerous creatures, its auras dismantling small rings of dark magic. But in times of war, it became battlefield itself. During Grindelwald's rise, auras died in duels across Europe, their numbers stretched thin. During Voldemort's first reign, the department was tested beyond its limits, its ranks infiltrated, its authority weakened by fear, and when the ministry itself fell under Voldemort's control, the department once protector became tool of tyranny. Its laws twisted, its auras forced to serve darkness or perish. The question lingers softly. Was the Department of Magical Law Enforcement shield of justice or wand of control? Was it protector of society or servant of power? Perhaps it was both, for in every age, it reflected the state of the ministry itself. When the ministry stood for fairness, the department fought bravely. When the ministry fell to corruption, it became a weapon of that corruption. In this imagining, we walk its corridors. Auras prepare for missions, their wands polished, their cloaks ready. Quills scratch in small offices, recording every breach of law, every enchanted kettle confiscated, every duel reported, and beneath it all hums the truth that the wizarding world survives not only by spells, but by the wands of those who enforce its fragile laws. The wizarding world has always been shared with creatures whose power and presence rival that of witches and wizards. From dragons soaring over mountains to house elves bound in kitchens, from centaurs who watch the stars to goblins who guard gold. The question of how to live beside magical beings has never been simple. To manage these relations, the ministry created the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, one of its oldest and most complex branches. The department began with simple purpose: to keep dangerous creatures from exposing magic to Muggles. Early officers recorded sightings of dragons, trolls, and werewolves, sending enforcers to drive them back into hiding. But as years passed, the department grew into a vast machine of bureaucracy, its work stretching far beyond simple control. It became the hand that defined how magical beings were classified, treated, and judged, shaping lives with ink on parchment and decrees spoken in council chambers. At its heart, the department divided creatures into three main categories. Beasts, such as dragons and manticores, were considered too wild for human-like governance. Beings, such as centaurs, goblins, and mer-people, were granted voice in magical law, though in practice they were often excluded from true power. Spirits, such as ghosts and poltergeists, were recognized as unique, their existence acknowledged but their rights uncertain. These classifications shaped every law that followed, deciding who could speak, who could carry wands, and who would be silenced. Controversy surrounded these divisions. Goblins argued fiercely for rights equal to wizards, their mastery of metal and finance unmatched. Yet laws forbade them from carrying wands, a restriction that fueled rebellions through centuries. Centaurs, proud and aloof, rejected offers of seats in wizard councils, claiming that wizarding law was corrupt, yet they too bore the weight of exclusion. House elves, bound by ancient enchantments, were not granted voice at all, their servitude ignored by law, their freedom seen as danger rather than right. Only in rare cases, through acts of kindness like Harry's gift to Dobby, did cracks form in this system, small signs of change against centuries of silence. The department also oversaw werewolf legislation, often harsh and unforgiving. Registries demanded names, employment was restricted, and prejudice grew sharper with every law. Figures like Remus Lupin lived lives of secrecy, their talents overlooked, their courage dismissed, all because of rules written to soothe fear rather than seek fairness. The department's actions in this field became symbol of its flaws, law shaped by fear, not by justice. And yet, the department was not only chain but shield. Its officers worked tirelessly to protect Muggles from discovery, sending teams to erase memories after dragon sightings, to clean up after troll attacks, to guard magical borders from breaches. Without such work, secrecy would have failed. Its regulation of breeding dangerous creatures, its oversight of experimental charms on animals, and its records of magical species preserved safety not only for wizards, but for the world at large. The question lingers softly. Was the department protector or oppressor? Was it shield that defended secrecy, or hand that pressed others into silence? Perhaps it was both, for every law written to protect also shaped boundaries that excluded, and every decree of safety carried shadow of prejudice. In this imagining, we walk the halls of the department. Shelves are stacked with scrolls listing creatures by type, their names etched in careful script. Wizards in plain robes argue quietly over classifications, while others rush out on missions to wrangle wayward beasts. Goblins glare in meetings, their voices unheard, while house elves slip silently through corridors unseen. And in these halls lies truth of wizarding law, that to govern creatures is to reveal how wizards see themselves as rulers of world they share, yet often blind to the equality they deny. No wizarding nation exists in isolation. Though the Statute of Secrecy demanded separation from Muggles, it also created the need for magical governments to cooperate with each other, for secrecy was fragile, and one breach in one country could ripple into all others. From this need grew the Department of International Magical Cooperation, a branch of the ministry devoted to diplomacy, treaties, and the delicate balance of wizarding politics across borders. The department was first conceived in the early 18th century as the Statute of Secrecy settled into practice. Accidents were common in those years. A dragon in Romania might terrify nearby Muggles, its flames visible for miles. A werewolf outbreak in France could lead to panic across villages. A poorly regulated cauldron in Germany might cause explosions noticed far beyond wizarding eyes. Each event threatened the global secrecy that all governments had sworn to uphold. And so international cooperation became not only useful but essential. At its core, the department worked to maintain unity. It established offices that corresponded with foreign ministries, sending envoys to negotiate treaties and share strategies. It oversaw international travel, regulating port keys, flu connections, and apparition between nations. It ensured that magical goods, from wands to cauldrons, met shared standards, preventing accidents that could expose wizarding life. And it managed disputes between nations, settling conflicts that might otherwise spill into open war. One of its greatest successes was in maintaining the International Confederation of Wizards, the closest thing to global government in the magical world. This body, older than the ministry itself, was given greater authority through the department's efforts. Representatives from across continents gathered to discuss laws, enforce secrecy, and debate matters of magical importance. The post of Supreme Muggle, head of the Confederation, carried weight that rivaled any national minister. In later years, Albus Dumbledore himself would hold that title, his voice guiding not only Britain but wizarding communities worldwide. Yet, diplomacy was rarely smooth. Cultural differences created tension, for each nation held unique traditions and prejudices. Goblin rebellions in Britain drew little sympathy from abroad, while werewolf laws varied sharply between countries, some offering protections while others imposed cruel restrictions. Even within secrecy, divisions grew, and the department often served less as peacemaker than as patcher of endless disputes. The Triwizard Tournament, too, fell under its purview, a tradition meant to foster friendship between schools, yet often remembered more for danger than unity. Its failures revealed the difficulty of true cooperation, for even shared games carried risk when pride and rivalry ruled. Still, the department persisted, its clerks writing letters across continents, its diplomats traveling quietly, its quills scratching treaties meant to preserve fragile peace. The question rests softly: was international cooperation an act of unity or of necessity? Was it true diplomacy or only fragile patch to prevent disaster? Perhaps it was both, for secrecy demanded strength greater than any one nation, and survival required alliance even when trust was thin. In this imagining, we walk the department's long halls, maps of the world spread across walls, pins marking incidents in distant lands. Wizards in formal robes debate translations of treaties, quills flying as memos cross oceans by enchanted owl. At the center, the International Confederation gathers, its chamber filled with accents and arguments, each voice part of the chorus that sustains secrecy. And in these halls lies truth of wizarding lore that no world, magical or muggle, can endure alone. Even in the most careful hands, magic is unpredictable. A spell spoken too quickly, a charm cast too strongly, a potion brewed with the wrong leaf, each can cause chaos in a moment. And when such accidents happen before Muggles, secrecy itself trembles. To respond to these dangers, the Ministry built the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes, a branch dedicated to repairing damage, concealing mistakes, and ensuring that magical disasters never break through the veil of secrecy. The department began as a small office in the early 18th century, staffed by wizards whose main task was to clean up after magical slips. They were called not enforcers but repairers, for their duty was not punishment but restoration. As time passed, their work grew into an entire system of sub-officers, each with precise role in protecting the fragile line between the magical and the Muggle worlds. The most famous of these was the Accidental Magic Reversal Squad. These witches and wizards rushed to scenes where spells had gone wrong, undoing transformations, dispelling charms, and calming chaos. Their work was often frantic, for magic gone wild rarely waited politely. Stories tell of teapots that grew legs and ran across streets, of Muggle policemen accidentally hexed into goats, of entire homes vanishing when charms backfired. The squad worked in secrecy, erasing traces, leaving behind nothing but confusion and faint memory of odd dream. The Obliviator headquarters also fell under this department. Obliviators were masters of memory charms, trained to erase or alter recollections of Muggles who had seen too much. They were perhaps the most vital protectors of secrecy, for no matter how careful wizards tried to be, accidents were constant. Muggles remembered dragons over hills, explosions of cauldrons, brooms streaking across skies. Obliviators rewrote those memories, weaving safer stories in their place. It was delicate work, for memory is fragile, and one wrong charm could damage mind forever. Yet their quiet efforts saved Wizarding Society countless times. Smaller offices also served within this department. The Muggle-worthy excuse committee created explanations to offer when obliviation was not enough, crafting stories of gas leaks, weather events, or accidents to explain magical chaos. The Invisibility Task Force managed large-scale concealments, cloaking entire events or creatures when danger spread too far. Even the Committee on Experimental Charms was sometimes consulted, its approval required before new spells could be cast in public. Yet, the department was not without flaw. Some accused Obliviators of overreach, erasing more than was needed, silencing Muggles who might have posed no threat. Others whispered of accidents left unsolved, their cover stories too thin to conceal suspicion. And in rare cases, magical catastrophes grew so large that even the department could barely contain them. The infamous Ilfracombe incident of 1932, when a Welsh green dragon attacked a beach full of Muggles, required nearly entire department working for weeks to erase memories and restore calm. The question rests softly. Was this department guardian or eraser? Was its purpose to protect lives or to hide truths? Perhaps both, for secrecy demanded silence, and silence required memory itself to bend. Without it, the wizarding world might have been revealed long ago. In this imagining, we walk through its offices, filled with piles of parchment and hurried memos. Wizards rush with wands drawn, called to another mishap. An Obliviator carefully rewrites a fisherman's memory, telling him he saw only storm clouds, not dragon wings. And all around, the hum of quills and spells speaks of quiet battle waged not against dark wizards, but against accidents, small slips that if left unchecked, could undo centuries of secrecy. Hidden deeper than any other office, beyond doors that few may enter, lies the most secret branch of the Ministry, the Department of Mysteries. Unlike other departments, its purpose is not administration, regulation, or enforcement. It is study of what cannot be explained, research into forces that shape life and death themselves. Those who work there are known only as unspeakables, for they are forbidden to share the knowledge they uncover. Their silence is not only rule, but oath, binding them as firmly as any spell. The department was created in the early years of the Ministry, when curiosity about the deepest powers of magic demanded more than scattered experiments. Wizards had always wondered about death, time, love, thought, and fate, but most research was unregulated, dangerous, and uncontrolled. The ministry gathered it into one place, sealing it from public view, creating chambers dedicated to mysteries that touch every life yet cannot be mastered. The Hall of Prophecy is perhaps the best known. Shelves stretch endlessly, stacked with glass orbs that contain the words of seers, each recording visions of futures uncertain. Most lie forgotten, their truths unclear, yet each has power to shape lives if heard. The prophecy concerning Harry and Voldemort, stored for years in silence, proved how one vision can bend the course of history. The Death Chamber is darker still. At its center stands ancient stone arch with veil that flutters though no wind stirs. Those who hear whispers beyond it say they sense voices of the dead. No one who steps through it. The chamber is studied endlessly, but even unspeakables admit they cannot explain it. It is doorway or end, or both. A reminder that death is mystery no spell can undo. The time chamber houses devices that bend hours and years. Time turners, delicate and dangerous, are kept there, their use restricted, their power feared. Experiments with time have often ended in disaster, and many devices have been destroyed to prevent catastrophe. Yet the study continues, for wizards cannot resist the question of whether time itself may be mastered. The Hall of Love, less spoken of, explores force more powerful than any curse. Those who enter describe chamber filled with ever-burning flame, though what is studied there remains secret. Some say the chamber seeks to explain why love protects against dark magic, why Lily Potter's sacrifice shielded Harry, why bonds of heart shape spells stronger than any wand. The ministry admits nothing, but whispers suggest its truths are among the most profound mysteries in existence. Other chambers exist, the brain room, where thought itself is studied, strange floating minds in tanks, the space chamber, exploring movement of stars and the pull of gravity upon magic. Each holds secrets beyond comprehension, each guarded fiercely. Few wizards ever see these places, and those who work there speak not of what they know, carrying their silence to the grave. The question rests softly. Is the Department of Mystery's pursuit of knowledge, or danger disguised as curiosity? Is it wisdom to study what cannot be controlled, or folly that risks disaster? Perhaps it is both, for every truth revealed carries cost, and some doors once opened cannot be closed. In this imagining, we walk its silent corridors. Torches flicker against stone, but the air is hushed, heavy with secrets. Doors line the hall, each leading to chamber beyond understanding. An unspeakable passers-by, robed in black, his eyes unreadable, his silence unbroken. And in that stillness lies the truth of wizarding lore, that even in government, there are mysteries too great to share, and some knowledge is guarded not by choice, but by silence itself. Not every branch of the ministry concerned itself with dark wizards, dangerous creatures, or mysteries beyond comprehension. Much of wizarding lore was upheld through smaller offices, quiet corners of the ministry where clerks worked at desks piled with parchment, their tasks less glamorous but no less essential. These minor offices, often overlooked, shaped daily life for witches and wizards, ensuring that even the simplest enchantments and charms did not endanger secrecy or order. Among the most important was the Flu Network Authority. This office managed the fireplaces connected to the network, regulating travel and communication across Britain. Every fireplace had to be approved, its connection monitored, its safety ensured. Unauthorized fireplaces were swiftly shut down. For the Flu Network, though convenient, was also vulnerable to misuse. Memos flew constantly through this office, registering new homes, tracing illegal connections, and inspecting enchantments to prevent accidents. For ordinary families, the authority determined whether they could speak to loved ones across distance or travel in an instant from hearth to hearth. The Portkey office carried similar responsibilities, Its workers created, regulated, and tracked enchanted objects that transported witches and wizards across space. From battered boots to broken teapots, each portkey had to be registered and timed carefully, lest unsuspecting Muggles stumble upon them. Accidents did happen, with Muggles transported to magical sites by mistake, and it was this office, alongside Obliviators, that managed such crises. During major events like the Quidditch World Cup, the portkey office labored day and night, preparing hundreds of objects to move thousands of witches and wizards in secrecy. The Time Turner Registry, though small, carried heavy responsibility. After dangerous experiments with time left scars on history itself, the Ministry restricted their use, requiring every Time Turner to be tracked and every request for one to be justified. Most were destroyed in later years, but the office remained. Its clerks, tasked with ensuring that time itself could not be bent without strict approval. Though few wizards ever saw this office, its rules protected the fabric of reality more than most realized. Other minor offices dealt with everyday details of magical life. The Broom Regulatory Control inspected broom models to ensure safety, recalling those whose enchantments proved faulty. The Lift Maintenance Subdivision ensured that the enchanted lifts of the Ministry ran smoothly, their rattling journeys between levels steady despite magic that kept them moving. Even the Committee on Experimental Charms held daily sway, reviewing new spells to determine whether they were safe for use in public. These offices were not glorious. Few tales were told of clerks who filed permits for broom travel or witches who inspected fireplaces. Yet without them, wizarding life would have been chaos, secrecy constantly at risk, accidents common. They were the quiet gears of the Ministry, the parts of government that kept daily life stable while others fought wars and faced mysteries. The question rests softly: do we measure government only by its grand battles, or also by its small offices that keep ordinary life in balance? Is heroism found only in auras and unspeakables, or also in clerks who ensure that travel is safe, that time is preserved, that secrecy is unbroken? Perhaps both, for a world is not held only by great acts, but by countless small ones. In this imagining, we walk narrow corridors, far from the grand atrium. Wizards sit at desks, stacked with parchment, quills scratching steadily. One checks portkey schedules, another reviews broom permits, a third files floor requests. There is no glory here, no mystery, only the steady hum of bureaucracy. Yet in their quiet work, the wizarding world endures, hidden and safe, its order preserved, not by spectacle but by the smallest of laws. The Wizengamot, older than the Ministry itself, remained at the heart of wizarding justice. Its purple-clad members, seated in high benches above the accused, carried power to shape lives with single ruling. Through its trials, wizarding law revealed not only guilt or innocence, but the values and prejudices of the age. Some trials are remembered for their fairness, others for their cruelty. Yet each left mark upon history, showing how the law could be both shield and weapon. One of the earliest and most notorious series of trials concerned goblin uprisings. Again and again, goblin leaders were brought before the Wizengamot, accused of rebellion, theft, or the carrying of wands. The judgments were harsh, often ending in imprisonment or execution, and the rebellions grew fiercer with each verdict. These trials revealed the failure of wizarding law to grant fairness, choosing instead to enforce dominance. Their legacy lingered in mistrust that endured long after the flames of rebellion dimmed. The trials of dark wizards also filled the chamber. In the 18th century, followers of dark arts were paraded before the Wizengamot, their crimes displayed in testimony of curses cast, lives taken, and laws broken. Some were condemned swiftly, their wands snapped, their names erased from records. Others escaped punishment through wealth or influence. their acquittals whispered about in anger and fear. These trials showed the fragile balance of justice, its ability to strike swiftly and its vulnerability to corruption. In more recent memory, the trials of Death Eaters after Voldemort's first fall stand as some of the most important in wizarding history. The chamber was filled with accused, their arms marked with a dark mark, their deeds whispered in terror. Some were condemned to Azkaban, their names sealed to infamy. Yet others escaped, claiming they had acted under the Imperious curse, their freedom leaving scars upon survivors who saw justice denied. The trials revealed how fear shaped judgment and how law could be bent by excuses too easily accepted. Harry himself once stood before the Wizengamot accused of conjuring a Patronus before Muggles. The trial was meant not for justice but for politics, Fudge seeking to discredit him and Dumbledore alike. Yet it revealed another truth, that the Wizengamot was not only court but stage for power. Its ruling swayed as much by politics as by law. In this trial, justice prevailed, for Dumbledore's defense carried weight, but the attempt itself showed the danger of law when twisted by ambition. The Wizengamot's chamber is remembered for solemnity, but it was also a place of spectacle. Trials were watched by the powerful, their outcomes carried by whispers through wizarding society. Each verdict shaped perception of law, teaching witches and wizards whether to trust their government or to fear it. And in each trial lay the reminder that law is not abstract, but living, breathing judgment, shaped by those who sit in authority. The question rests quietly. Was the Wizengamot truly court of justice or chamber of politics? Was it shield that defended society or weapon wielded by those in power? Perhaps it was always both, for its legacy shows fairness and corruption entwined. Verdicts that shape lives as much as history. In this imagining, we sit in a high chamber, stone walls echoing, torches burning low. The accused stands bound in chains, voices rise from benches above, and verdicts fall like thunder. Some trials end in silence, others in cries of outrage, but all leave mark that lingers. For in the Wizengamot, wizarding law reveals itself not in parchment, but in judgment. From the earliest days of wizarding society, dueling was both tradition and danger. Disputes between witches and wizards often ended with wands drawn, spells flashing in anger, and lives risked for honor or revenge. At first, these contests were unregulated, guided only by personal codes of pride. But as accidents multiplied and secrecy grew fragile, the need for laws became clear. Thus began the long history of dueling regulations, laws that sought to restrain magical combat without erasing it. In medieval times, duels were common in public squares, witnessed by both magical and non-magical eyes. These contests endangered secrecy. For Muggles who saw them often spread tales of sorcery. Councils attempted to restrict them, but with little success. Only with the rise of the Wizengamot did rules begin to take firm shape. Duels were declared illegal in public spaces, punishments imposed for reckless displays, and strict codes established for those still permitted. By the 18th century, dueling had become regulated sport, as well as dangerous crime. Laws required formal challenge, overseen by witnesses who ensured fairness. Certain spells were forbidden, such as the unforgivable curses, whose use carried immediate sentence of imprisonment. Injuries were common, but deaths were meant to be rare, and healers often stood by to mend wounds swiftly. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement kept lists of licensed duelists, those permitted to fight in official matches, their names recorded with care. Despite regulation, illegal dueling thrived. In hidden halls and abandoned barns, witches and wizards clashed for pride, revenge, or profit. These contests were harder to control, often ending in death or exposure. The improper use of magic office pursued them relentlessly, yet they could never fully be stamped out. For dueling carried a lure, the thrill of combat, the test of skill, the belief that honor could be proven in clash of wands. Famous cases shaped the laws further. The duel between Dumbledore and Grindelwald in 1945, though far beyond legality, reshaped wizarding history and became symbol of both danger and necessity of magical combat. Later, in the First Wizarding War, dueling laws were stretched thin, for Death Eaters clashed with auras in battles that blurred the line between war and crime. By the time of Voldemort's return, the Ministry often ignored breaches of dueling law, for the war made every street battlefield. Yet in times of peace, the regulations remained. Hogwarts itself once hosted dueling clubs, meant to teach students discipline and restraint. The rules passed down there reflected centuries of law. The ban on unforgivable curses, the expectation of fairness, the insistence that dueling should end when opponent yielded. These lessons, though simple, carried weight, shaping young witches and wizards into fighters who might one day face darker battles. The question lingers softly: were dueling laws protection of life or denial of tradition? Were they shield to prevent chaos or attempt to control instinct too strong to suppress? Perhaps they were both, for combat was part of wizarding culture, and law could not erase it, only shape its boundaries. In this imagining, we stand in chamber where two duelists bow, wands raised, witnesses watching carefully. Spells flash, sparks dance, yet rules hold the chaos back, ensuring that pride is tested, but secrecy preserved. In another corner of the world, in darker place, two wizards clash without law, their curses forbidden, their battle deadly. And between these two scenes lies truth of dueling law, that magic demands restraint, but restraint can never silence fire completely. Among all magical beings, none reveal the contradictions of wizarding law more clearly than house elves. Bound by ancient enchantments to serve wizarding families, their lives have long been shaped not by choice but by servitude. The Ministry of Magic, in its many laws, reinforced this system rather than challenged it, creating framework that kept elves silent and invisible, even as their magic was powerful, their loyalty profound, and their suffering unspoken. From the earliest days of the Ministry, house elves were classified not as beasts, but as beings. In theory, this should have granted them voice in magical lore, alongside goblins and centaurs. In practice, their voices were never heard. The enchantments that bound them to wizards meant that most elves never sought freedom, and most wizards saw no need to grant it. Laws instead focused on regulating their service, ensuring obedience, and preventing rebellion. One of the earliest decrees forbade elves from carrying wands, reinforcing their subservience. Another allowed families to pass elves from one generation to the next as property, their lives tied to lineage rather than individual choice. Even punishment was left to masters, with little interference from ministry law. To strike or mistreat an elf was not crime in the eyes of government, for cruelty was hidden behind enchantment of loyalty. And yet, the contradiction grew sharper, for elves possessed magic far beyond what most wizards understood, their ability to apparate where others could not, to wield power without wands, to defend fiercely those they served, made them both invaluable and feared. The ministry's laws reflected this unease, controlling their status while quietly relying on their abilities to keep wizarding households safe and secrecy intact. It was not until Harry Potter freed Dobby with Gift of a Sock that the possibility of elf freedom became more than dream. Yet even then, law did not change. Dobby was an anomaly, his freedom recognized by magic itself, not by parchments signed in ministry halls. Hermione Granger, years later, would campaign through SPW for reform, demanding wages, rights, and dignity. But her efforts revealed truth long known, that wizarding society, for all its laws, was slow to grant equality, and prejudice was written deep into its codes. The absence of change was not ignorance, but willful silence. Many pureblood families relied on elves to maintain their homes, their traditions, their pride. To challenge servitude would have meant challenging their very way of life, and so the Wizengamot looked away, preferring old comfort to new justice. Even ministers who sought reform, like Eldritch Diggory, found their efforts blocked by those unwilling to let go of power. The question rests softly: were house elf laws protection or injustice? Was the ministry preserving tradition or enslaving beings too bound by magic to resist? Perhaps both, for law often reflects prejudice as much as fairness, and the silence of centuries speaks louder than any decree. In this imagining, we walk the kitchens of Hogwarts, where dozens of elves move quietly, preparing meals unseen. Their eyes shine with loyalty, yet beneath that loyalty lies enchantment older than the ministry itself. Above them, laws written in stone halls declare their servitude legal, their voices unheard. And in that silence lies truth of wizarding law, that justice, though often claimed, was not always granted. If house elves revealed the silence of wizarding law, goblins revealed its conflict. Proud, skilled, and fiercely intelligent, goblins never accepted subservience quietly. Their mastery of metalwork and finance gave them wealth and influence, but wizarding law denied them equality. Again and again, this imbalance erupted into rebellion, and each time the Wizengamot and the ministry answered not with reform, but with force. The history of goblin law is history of mistrust, resistance, and conflict unresolved. At the heart of the tension was wands. Wizarding law forbade goblins from carrying them, declaring that wand magic belonged only to witches and wizards. To goblins, this was insult and injustice, for their own magic was powerful, though expressed differently. They shaped metal with enchantments that even wizards could not replicate, forged goblin silver that absorbed magic without losing brilliance, and created weapons that endured through centuries. Yet still they were told they were lesser. Their hands denied the tool that symbolized power in wizarding society. Rebellions erupted across the 17th and 18th centuries, each sparked by refusal to accept laws that bound them. Goblin leaders demanded rights: the right to carry wands, the right to equal voice in councils, the right to own the objects they forge. Wizards refused, and violence followed. The ministry responded with auras and harsh punishments, crushing each uprising with spells and prisons. Records of these conflicts remain in archives, their details blurred by centuries, but their legacy is clear. Each rebellion ended with goblins defeated, their demands unmet, their resentment sharpened. Ownership was another source of dispute. Goblins believed that objects they created remained theirs by right, merely loaned to wizards who purchased them. Upon a wizard's death, goblins expected such items to return to their makers. Wizards, by contrast, claimed permanent ownership. This clash of belief led to countless conflicts, some personal, others erupting into broader uprisings. The ministry's rulings always favored wizards, reinforcing the divide, deepening mistrust. The Wizengamot tried at times to soften tensions with small concessions. Agreements were signed to allow goblins greater control of Gringotts, giving them authority over wizarding wealth in exchange for peace. Yet these agreements were fragile, for true equality was never granted. Wizards relied on goblins to guard their gold, yet never trusted them enough to share real power. The rebellions revealed more than anger. They revealed the unwillingness of wizarding law to bend. Each uprising might have been prevented had rights been granted, had prejudice been set aside. Instead, the ministry chose suppression, believing force would preserve stability. In truth, it preserved only silence, for goblin resentment never vanished. Even in later years, during Voldemort's return, goblins questioned their alliances, their trust in wizards fractured by centuries of betrayal. The question rests softly: were the goblin rebellions crimes, or cries for justice? Were they threats to secrecy, or demands for dignity? Perhaps both, for history shows that rebellion often rises when law denies fairness too long. And in the wizarding world, fairness was sacrificed to fear of losing power. In this imagining, we see goblin leaders standing in Wizengamot chambers, their demands written in sharp script, their voices raised. Across from them sit witches and wizards in robes of power, their verdicts already decided. Outside, rebellions burn, spells clash, and silence falls again after defeat. And in that silence lies the truth of wizarding law, that peace without justice is never peace at all. Few areas of wizarding law reveal fear more sharply than those concerning werewolves. From the earliest days of the ministry, werewolves were treated not as people cursed by misfortune, but as dangers to be contained. Their condition, feared for its violence and unpredictability, became subject of harsh laws that punished them for what they could not control. Across centuries, legislation grew heavier, shaping lives not with protection but with prejudice, leaving scars that lasted through generations. At first, there were no formal rules, only whispered warnings. Villages drove out those who transformed under the moon. Families hid afflicted children, and many lived in exile. By the 17th century, the Wizengamot began passing decrees that demanded registration of all known werewolves. Names were listed in ministry records, addresses tracked, families watched. In theory, this was meant for safety. In practice, it branded every werewolf as outcast, their privacy erased, their dignity dismissed. Employment restrictions followed. Laws forbade werewolves from many professions, claiming risk too great. Teaching, healing, even simple shopkeeping were closed to them, leaving most in poverty. Few employers dared defy such rules, and those who did faced scrutiny themselves. The result was a cycle of hardship. Poverty bred secrecy, secrecy bred fear, and fear bred harsher laws. By the 19th century, legislation demanded that werewolves could not gather in groups for fear of uprisings. Curfews were imposed during full moons, though enforcement was near impossible. The ministry created special units to track and restrain them, yet offered little aid for wolfsbane potion when it was finally invented. Even in the late 20th century, when Severus Snape brooded for Remus Lupin at Hogwarts, access was rare, its cost too great for most to afford. Figures like Dolores Umbridge only worsened the prejudice. As senior undersecretary, she supported laws that stripped away what few protections existed, pushing for werewolves to be barred from nearly all employment. Her decrees revealed how prejudice could be sharpened into law, her quill turning bigotry into policy with strokes of ink. Lupin himself, though brilliant and kind, was forced from his post at Hogwarts, not because of misconduct, but because of fear. Law and society together left him no place to stand. Even in war, werewolves were treated with suspicion. Many, driven to desperation, joined Voldemort, lured by promises of freedom and respect. Yet others fought alongside the Order, risking lives for a society that gave them little in return. Fenrir Greyback became symbol of fear, his cruelty feeding stereotypes that all werewolves were monsters. But for every Greyback, there was a Lupin, showing that curse need not define character. Still, law rarely recognized this truth. The question rests softly: were werewolf laws protection or persecution? Were they meant to preserve safety or to feed prejudice? Perhaps both, for fear is easy to write into parchment and harder to erase. History shows that law often follows fear, and fear of werewolves was never truly about danger, but about difference. In this imagining, we walk through ministry corridors where clerks stamped names into thick registry books. Families beg for privacy, but quills scratch on. Notices are posted forbidding employment. Warnings spread through villages. Fear passed from parent to child. And above it all hangs truth of wizarding law, that sometimes rules are not shield but wound, cutting deeper than any curse. When Voldemort first rose to power, the Ministry of Magic was tested in ways it had never known before. For centuries it had enforced secrecy, regulated creatures, and passed laws that shaped daily life. But it had never faced dark wizard whose power stretched across Britain, whose followers infiltrated every corner of society, whose ambition sought to overthrow the very order the ministry claimed to protect. The First Wizarding War revealed both the strength and the weakness of wizarding law, and its legacy haunted every decade that followed. At first, the ministry responded as it always had, with laws, decrees, and trials. The Auror Office was given greater authority, its members tasked with hunting Death Eaters in duels that often ended in death. Emergency powers were granted, allowing arrests on suspicion alone. The Wizengamot chamber filled with accused, many condemned swiftly to Azkaban, yet fear and haste meant mistakes, and some innocents suffered while others guilty escaped through influence or deception. Law in its rush bent under pressure, and fairness was often forgotten. The improper use of Magic Office expanded its reach, watching for signs of dark enchantments. New decrees restricted travel, trade, and gatherings, claiming to preserve safety but tightening fear. Yet even as parchment multiplied, Voldemort's reach spread further, his followers hidden in ministry ranks, their loyalty concealed until too late. The very institution meant to protect society became vulnerable from within. For ordinary witches and wizards, trust in the ministry faltered. Families whispered that trials were unfair, that justice was swayed by politics, that leaders cared more for appearances than for truth. Some saw the ministry as shield, others as hollow shell already cracking. Dumbledore, who led the Order of the Phoenix, grew increasingly wary of relying on government that seemed unable to meet the true scale of threat. The fall of Voldemort in 1981 brought relief, but also reckoning. Trials resumed with frenzy, Death Eaters captured, their arms bared to reveal the Dark Mark. Some were condemned to Azkaban, their names cursed in memory. Yet others escaped punishment, claiming they acted under imperious curse. The Wizengamot accepted such pleas readily, eager to close the chapter and return to calm. For many, this leniency felt like betrayal, proof that the ministry wished not justice, but peace, bought through silence. The war revealed how fragile wizarding law could be. In theory, it was shield strong enough to protect society. In practice, it bent under fear, swayed by influence, and failed to stand firm when darkness rose. Its structures survived, but its trust was broken, leaving scars that shaped how witches and wizards saw their government in years to come. The question rests softly. Was the ministry during the First War protector or bystander? Was it soldier fighting for survival, or stage where fear and corruption played louder than justice? Perhaps both, for it fought bravely at times, yet faltered at others, showing that law is only as strong as those who uphold it. In this imagining, we walk the ministry's atrium during the war, Aurors rush past, their cloaks torn from battle, memos fly with urgent news, and the Wizengamot chamber rings with verdicts spoken in haste. Families wait outside, fearful for justice, fearful for safety, and above it all, the golden statues gleam, their shine dimmed by fear, their promise of unity strained. The ministry endures, but its faith is shaken, and the wizarding world steps into uneasy peace, knowing the shadow has not truly gone. When Voldemort fell on that night in Godric's Hollow, the wizarding world erupted in relief. Celebrations filled the streets, owls carried news across every home, and witches and wizards who had lived in fear dared at last to breathe freely. Yet, in the halls of the ministry, celebration quickly gave way to reckoning. For dozens of captured Death Eaters, and many more suspected, were brought before the Wizengamot. The question was not only guilt, but how justice should be measured after years of terror. The trials came swiftly. Accusations filled the chamber. Names shouted, memories shared through pensive testimony. Scars of curses shown as proof. Some cases were clear, their crimes too great to deny. Bellatrix Lestrange, rabid in her loyalty, was condemned to Azkaban without hesitation, her laughter echoing as she was led away. Others, like Antonin Dolohov and Augustus Rookwood, were sentenced for their known acts of cruelty, their guilt certain. For them, justice was sharp, though never enough to heal the wounds they left. But many stood accused whose stories were more complex. Some claimed to have acted under the Imperious Curse, insisting that their loyalty to Voldemort was forced, not chosen. Others argued that they had never carried dark marks, that they had served only in fear. The Wizengamot often accepted these defenses, perhaps too readily, for the desire to close the chapter was strong. Lucius Malfoy, wealthy and influential, escaped true punishment through such claims, his gold and reputation bending justice into leniency. The speed of the trials revealed the ministry's fear. It wished to restore peace, to show that order had returned, to assure the public that darkness had been defeated. Yet in its haste, fairness was uneven. Some were condemned too quickly, denied full defense. Others, guilty yet powerful, walked free with only whispers of suspicion clinging to them. Justice, meant to be shield, became mirror of prejudice, reflecting power as much as truth. For families who had lost loved ones, the trials brought little comfort. To see some punished was balm, but to see others excused was wound reopened. Survivors of torture, like the Longbottom's friends and kin, watched as some tormentors were imprisoned while others walked away. The wizarding world learned bitter truth, that law in practice was shaped not only by guilt but by politics, not only by justice but by fear. In time, these choices would haunt the ministry. For those who escaped punishment returned to Voldemort when he rose again. They proved that leniency born of fear is not mercy, but danger deferred. The trials of the Death Eaters stand as reminder that law, when bent, does not end conflict, but plants seed for it to return. The question rests softly: were the Wizengamot's judgments justice or theater? Were they trials of truth or hurried performances to soothe a frightened public? Perhaps both, for justice was sought, but unevenly, leaving scars that trust could not mend. In this imagining, we sit in the chamber after Voldemort's fall. Chains rattle as prisoners are led in, robed figures lean forward, voices echo with accusations. Some leave bound for Azkaban, their faces twisted with defiance. Others leave free, their cloaks unruffled, their influence untouched. And above it all, the chamber whispers with unease, for though the Dark Lord is gone, the question of justice remains, fragile as parchment. After years of fragile peace, the ministry sought stability, and into that desire stepped Cornelius Fudge. At first he seemed harmless, almost bumbling, a man eager to please, quick to flatter, and rarely bold. Yet in time his leadership revealed dangers as great as open tyranny, for his fear, vanity, and denial corroded the ministry from within. Under his hand, wizarding law was not shield of justice, but tool of control, twisted to silence truth and preserve his own power. Fudge's tenure began quietly enough. He relied heavily on advice from Dumbledore in his early years, often sending owls for guidance and leaning upon the headmaster's wisdom. But as his confidence grew, so too did his suspicion. Dumbledore's influence made him uneasy, for whispers spread that the Hogwarts headmaster could one day be minister himself. Fudge's vanity turned this whisper into fear, and fear into hostility. From that seed of doubt grew conflict that shaped the second rise of Voldemort. When Harry Potter returned from the graveyard with truth of Voldemort's return, Fudge refused to believe. His denial was not ignorance, but choice, for to admit the Dark Lord had risen was to admit failure of his leadership. Instead, he declared Harry liar, Dumbledore manipulator, and the Order of the Phoenix rebels against ministry authority. Laws were twisted to silence dissent, newspapers pressured to mock Harry's words, and trials used as stage for humiliation. The Wizengamot trial of Harry for conjuring a Patronus stands as symbol of this corruption. A boy defending himself from Dementors was dragged before full court, accused of reckless magic, threatened with expulsion. The trial was never about Patronus' charm, but about silencing Harry's voice, discrediting his truth. Though Dumbledore's defense saved him, the attempt revealed how law had become a weapon in Fudge's hand, a tool of politics rather than justice. Meanwhile, Dolores Umbridge rose within the ministry, embodying its corruption with zeal. Her decrees at Hogwarts, her cruel punishments, her refusal to teach true defense were extensions of Fudge's denial. Through her, the ministry sought not to prepare children for danger, but to control them with fear and obedience. Her educational decrees, signed with flourish, revealed how parchment could wound as deeply as wand, each line stripping freedom in name of order. By the time Voldemort revealed himself openly, Fudge's authority was shattered. His refusal to act had allowed Death Eaters to regroup. His laws had punished the innocent while protecting the guilty, and his fear had weakened the ministry's very foundation. He was removed, but the damage endured, for his years had shown how fragile wizarding law could be when placed in hands of man more concerned with power than with truth. The question rests softly. Was Fudge villain or coward? Was his corruption born of cruelty or of fear, too deep to admit truth? Perhaps both, for denial can wound as sharply as malice, and weakness in leader can break law as surely as intent. His legacy reminds us that ministry's greatest danger is not always dark wizard from outside, but frailty within. In this imagining, we walk the ministry's atrium during Fudge's reign. Posters declare Harry liar, memos spread denial, and laws tighten around truth like chains in the Wizengamot chamber. Verdicts are swayed not by justice but by fear, and in Hogwarts, children carve scars into their hands under Umbridge's quill. The golden fountain gleams still, but its promise is hollow, for beneath its shine the ministry has turned inward, blind to danger rising around it. When Voldemort revealed himself at last, the ministry's denial could no longer stand. Cornelius Fudge was swept aside, replaced by Rufus Scrimgeour, a man of strength and determination. Yet, by the time he took office, the ministry was already fragile, its trust broken, its laws bent too long by corruption. Though Scrimgeour sought to rally resistance, his ministry never regained the faith of the people, and when Voldemort struck, the institution crumbled. The fall of the Ministry during the Second Wizarding War revealed how deeply fear had hollowed it and how easily law could be twisted into weapon of tyranny. Scrimgeour's rule was marked by urgency. He tightened aura patrols, imposed stricter controls on travel, and sought alliances with the Order of the Phoenix. Yet he could not escape suspicion, for many saw his ministry as continuation of Fudge's failure. His attempt to use Harry Potter as symbol of unity backfired, for Harry resisted being paraded as ministry's poster child. Still, Scrimgeour fought bravely, and he died under Voldemort's attack, refusing to betray Harry's whereabouts. His death was noble, but it marked the end of Ministry's resistance. Voldemort's rise was not loud conquest, but quiet infiltration. His followers slipped into Ministry posts. His influence spread through whispers, and soon the institution meant to defend Wizarding Society served him instead. Pious Thickness, placed under Imperious curse, became puppet minister, his signature binding laws that served the Dark Lord. What had once been government of secrecy became engine of terror, its parchment soaked in fear. The laws under Voldemort's ministry revealed the full corruption of wizarding governance. The Muggle-born Registration Commission was established, forcing those without pure wizarding blood to prove their legitimacy. Trials were mockeries, overseen by Umbridge, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she condemned innocence. Azkaban filled not with dark wizards but with victims their only crime birth. The Wizengamot Chamber, once flawed but still voice of law, became stage of cruelty, its purple robes now cloaks of fear. Even ordinary officers were bent to serve darkness. The Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures was used to tighten chains around goblins and werewolves. The Aura Office became tool of oppression, hunting rebels rather than protecting the weak. Propaganda flowed through the Daily Prophet, now under Ministry control, spreading lies that Harry was criminal, that Muggle-borns were thieves of magic. Law once meant to shield secrecy, now shielded tyranny, its words written not for justice but for domination. For witches and wizards, the fall of the Ministry was as much betrayal as defeat. Families who once looked to it for protection now feared its letters, its summons, its decrees. Resistance shifted underground, led not by Ministry but by Order of the Phoenix and by students in Hogwarts. The Ministry, corrupted and controlled, became enemy rather than ally, its halls echoing with footsteps of Death Eaters instead of guardians. The fall was swift, but its recovery would take years, for even after Voldemort's defeat, the scars remain. How could society trust laws that had been twisted so easily? How could citizens believe in fairness when parchment had condemned the innocent so quickly? The fall of the Ministry proved that law is fragile, and that without courage in those who wield it, justice can be lost overnight. The question rests softly. Was the Ministry's fall inevitable, weakened already by denial and corruption? Or could stronger leadership have preserved it against Voldemort's rise? Perhaps both, for weakness within made it vulnerable to shadow. Without, its collapse is reminder that law survives not in parchment but in people, and when people bend, parchment burns. In this imagining, we walk the atrium under Voldemort's control. Statues of Muggles kneel beneath wizards, propaganda posters line the walls, and trials condemn the innocent in chambers meant for justice. The golden fountain is gone, replaced by cruel symbols of power, and in those halls lies truth of the Ministry's fall, that when darkness seizes law, the very institution meant to protect becomes weapon of fear. The night of the Battle of Hogwarts was not only end of Voldemort, but collapse of the shadow government he had built within the Ministry. As the Dark Lord fell, chains that bound wizarding law to his will broke apart, and Britain faced question greater than victory. How could Ministry be rebuilt after its laws had been twisted, its courts corrupted, its trust shattered? The answer lay not in parchment alone, but in courage of those who survived, who chose to shape government into shield once more, rather than weapon. The Ministry had not fought the final battle. Its halls were silent while Hogwarts stood as last fortress of resistance. Yet when dawn came and Voldemort was gone, Ministry was called to life again. For Wizarding Society needed structure as Carbon overflowed with Death Eaters and collaborators. Trials had to be held. Secrecy still had to be preserved. For all its failings, the Ministry could not be abandoned. It had to be mended, its flaws faced, its laws rewritten where they had been bent to serve tyranny. Kingsley Shacklebolt, once Auroran trusted ally of the Order, became acting minister in Aftermath. His leadership brought calm, for he was known for fairness, bravery, and steady hand. Unlike fudge or thickness, Kingsley held no vanity, no hunger for power. His task was not to rule with grandeur, but to heal. Under him, the Ministry began process of cleansing itself. Trials were reopened, but this time with care, ensuring justice was not rushed, ensuring that excuses like Imperius were examined with scrutiny rather than accepted without question. Departments too were reshaped. The Muggle-born Registration Commission was dissolved, its records burned, its victims freed. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement was purged of those who had served Voldemort willingly, Aurors who betrayed their duty removed. The Wizengamot, its robes still stained by mock trials, was reformed, its members questioned, its power made steadier. Even small offices, from Portkey regulation to Obliviator teams, had to be rebuilt, for all had been touched by corruption in some way. Rebuilding also meant new laws. Efforts were made to grant fairer treatment to werewolves, to soften prejudice that had driven many into Voldemort's ranks. Goblin relations were reopened, though mistrust remained deep. Discussions began about rights of house elves. Inspired by sacrifices of Dobby, those centuries of silence could not be undone in a few months. Each step was small, but each showed that Ministry, though wounded, sought to learn. For the wizarding public, faith returned slowly. Families who had watched Ministry betray them did not trust it easily again. But Kingsley's presence, his calm voice, his refusal to hide truth, helped. He admitted failings rather than denying them, promising not perfection, but effort. And in that honesty, the Ministry began to heal. The question rests softly. Can law once corrupted be trusted again? Can institution that served tyranny become shield once more? Perhaps yes, for law is not stone, but river, always reshaped by hands that guide it. The Ministry's fall revealed its weakness, but its rebuilding revealed its resilience. In this imagining, we walk the atrium after the battle. Rubble is cleared, golden fountain restored, but scars remain. Trials are held once more, but now with fairness, witnesses heard with care. Kingsley sits in office not as tyrant but as servant, quill in hand, writing reforms that promise new dawn. The Ministry stands again, not perfect, but striving, its history reminder of both failure and hope. When Kingsley Shacklebolt assumed leadership of the Ministry, the wizarding world stood at fragile crossroads. Victory over Voldemort had brought relief, yet scars of corruption and betrayal lingered. Families asked whether law could be trusted again, whether Ministry could truly protect rather than oppress. Kingsley understood that rebuilding trust required more than words of comfort. It required reform, new laws that showed Ministry had learned from its failures and would not repeat them. One of his first actions was to restore fairness to the Wizengamot. Its ranks had been tainted by members who served Voldemort's puppet government, presiding over mock trials that condemned innocent Muggle-borns. Kingsley dismissed those proven corrupt, replacing them with witches and wizards known for integrity rather than influence. Trials of Death Eaters were reopened, but with care, evidence was weighed properly, witnesses heard fully, verdicts delivered with balance rather than haste. Justice, long twisted, began to breathe again. Another reform addressed the Auro office. During the war, its ranks had been thinned, some Auras killed in battle, others corrupted or coerced. Kingsley rebuilt it with younger recruits, many drawn from those who fought at Hogwarts. Neville Longbottom, Ginny Weasley, and others were offered paths into ministry service. Though some chose different lives, training was reshaped to emphasize not only combat, but fairness, reminding Auras that they were guardians, not executioners. Laws regarding werewolves were softened, though change came slowly. The registry remained, but Kingsley sought to reduce restrictions on employment, offering opportunities long denied. Wolfsbane potion, once scarce and costly, was made more accessible. Ruin ministry-funded batches for those who needed it. Though prejudice in society remained, the legal walls began to weaken, giving werewolves chance to live with dignity rather than exile. House elf rights too were discussed in new light. The sacrifice of Dobby had moved many, and Hermione Granger pressed the ministry to address centuries of silence. Small steps were taken, decrees allowing wages for those who sought them, protections against cruelty stronger than before. Though far from full equality, these reforms marked beginning of change, proof that voices long ignored could finally be heard. Goblins, too, saw cautious attempts at reconciliation. Kingsley met with leaders of Gringotts to address centuries of mistrust. Agreements were drafted to ensure fairer contracts, though disputes about wand rights and ownership of goblin-made objects remained unresolved. The talks revealed that some divides could not be mended quickly, yet even the attempt was step toward better future. International cooperation also grew stronger under his hand. Having fought alongside Dumbledore's army and the Order, Kingsley valued alliances. Britain's ministry worked more closely with the International Confederation of Wizards, sharing strategies for rebuilding, strengthening secrecy, and preventing rise of dark wizards elsewhere. His calm voice carried weight abroad, helping restore Britain's reputation after years of corruption. For ordinary witches and wizards, the greatest reform was transparency. Kingsley made ministry's actions more open, speaking plainly of its failings, inviting scrutiny rather than hiding behind denial. Laws were explained clearly, decrees debated rather than imposed, and the Daily Prophet, freed from control, carried news that reflected truth rather than propaganda. Slowly, trust grew, fragile yet real. The question rests softly: can scars of tyranny ever be erased, or only healed? Was Kingsley's ministry new dawn, or simply calmer chapter in endless struggle between justice and power? Perhaps both. For history shows that law is never finished, but always rewritten, its fairness tested in each generation. In this imagining, we see Kingsley in his office, tall and steady, quill moving carefully across parchment. Around him, auras train, Wizengamot hears trials, and clerks draft decrees that seek not to silence, but to protect. The ministry breathes again, its halls filled not with fear, but with cautious hope. And though its flaws remain, its laws bend now toward justice more than cruelty, a reminder that change, slow, is possible. Wizarding law has always revealed as much about fear and prejudice as it has about wisdom and justice. To read its history is to see reflection of wizarding society itself, with all its flaws and hopes bound into parchment. Some laws were written to protect, shielding secrecy and preserving peace. Others were written to control, binding creatures, punishing the cursed, silencing the weak. Across centuries, law has been both mirror and mold, showing who wizards were and shaping who they became. The Statute of Secrecy was born from fear of Muggle persecution, and though it preserved magical life, it also sealed wizards into hidden world. The classification of creatures reflected not equality but hierarchy, granting rights to some and denying them to others. House elves were bound by silence, goblins chained by mistrust, werewolves branded by prejudice. Each law claimed to protect order, yet each revealed bias written deep into wizarding culture. And yet, laws also carried progress. The creation of the ministry itself was a step forward, giving structure where chaos reigned. The Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes showed compassion, for its task was not punishment but repair. The Auror Office, though harsh at times, stood as shield against dark wizards who threatened all. Even in the darkest chapters, sparks of fairness shone, reminding society that law could serve not only power but justice. The trials of Death Eaters after Voldemort's fall revealed the fragility of justice, but they also reminded the world of need for reform. Kingsley's later efforts showed how law could be softened, how prejudice could be challenged, even if only in small steps. Change was never swift, never complete, but it was real. Each generation rewrote what came before, bending laws slowly toward fairness, even when Shadow tried to bend them back. Law is mirror, but mirror changes as those who look into it change. What once seemed normal, like servitude of elves, later seemed cruel. What once seemed protection, like werewolf registries, later seemed persecution. Each era thought its laws just, yet history revealed their flaws, and each new voice that rose, a Dumbledore who questioned secrecy, a Hermione who fought for elves, a Kingsley who demanded transparency, polished mirror into clearer shape. The question rests softly: is law ever final, or only reflection of moment in time? Is justice true, or only aspiration, always pursued, but never fully caught? Perhaps both, for law is not stone, but river, flowing with society's choices, carrying prejudice and progress together. In this imagining, we stand in Wizengamot chamber, parchment scattered across tables, quills scratching new decrees. The robes of council shimmer purple, the walls echo with debate, and outside, ordinary witches and wizards wait to see how law will touch their lives. Some rulings will be fair, others cruel, but all will reflect who society is in that moment. And in that reflection lies truth, that wizarding law is not only shield or chain, but mirror, showing both shadow and light of those who write it. The Ministry of Magic has always been more than government. To some, it is symbol of unity, the great institution that holds Wizarding Britain together, its atrium filled with wizards of every background, its memos and decrees shaping life from the smallest broom regulation to the greatest international treaty. To others, it is symbol of division, a place where prejudice is written into law, where corruption festers behind polished stone, where fear bends parchment into chains. Its history is both. In times of peace, the ministry appears as fortress of stability. Children grow into adults who file wand permits, flow requests, and broom licenses without question. The golden fountain gleams in atrium. Visitors step from fireplaces into busy corridors, and the hum of bureaucracy gives comfort. For many, it is proof that secrecy endures, that order is maintained, that wizarding society, though hidden, is strong. Yet in times of war, the ministry becomes stage of betrayal. During Voldemort's rise, its halls echoed not with fairness but with fear, its laws bent to silence truth, its court twisted into mockery. Even the statues in its atrium changed, from golden figures of unity to marble of oppression, Muggles carved kneeling beneath wizards. For those who lived through those years, the ministry was not protector but oppressor, not symbol of unity but of division deeper than ever before. The Wizengamot chamber itself embodies this duality. At times, it delivered justice, punishing dark wizards, preserving order. At other times, it condemned innocence, acquitted guilty, or silenced truth for sake of politics. The purple robes of its members shine with authority, yet their verdicts reveal truth of their age, whether just or unjust. The ministry is also a place of contradiction in daily life. It declares house elves beings, yet upholds laws that enforce servitude. It regulates goblins, yet relies on their banks. It funds wolfsbane potion, yet keeps registries that brand werewolves for life. Each contradiction reveals that law is mirror of prejudice as much as of fairness. And yet, in the same breath, the ministry is where reforms begin, where figures like Kingsley Shacklebolt turn prejudice into progress, where voices once silenced are slowly heard. To see ministry clearly is to see wizarding world itself flawed, divided, often unjust, yet capable of growth. It is unity and division bound together, golden fountain and marble of oppression standing in same halls. Its history shows that institutions can wound as much as protect, but also that they can change, reshaped by those brave enough to demand it. The question rests softly. Is ministry symbol of unity or division? Is it fortress of secrecy that binds wizards together, or cage that divides them from creatures and even from one another? Perhaps it is always both, its meaning shifting with each age, each leader, each law. In this imagining, we stand again in atrium. Fireplaces flare, memos drift as paper airplanes across high ceiling. Footsteps echo on polished floor. To visitor, it seems symbol of strength, unshakable. Yet in shadows of same hall, whispers recall trials unjust, laws bent, trust broken. The ministry endures as symbol, but symbol of what depends on those who guide it. For unity and division live side by side within its walls. From the first whispered codes of secrecy to the vast underground halls of the ministry, wizarding law has always carried dual face. It is shield and chain, fairness and prejudice, unity and division. Across centuries it has preserved life, protected secrecy, and punished those who endangered society. Yet it has also silenced voices, denied rights, and reflected the fear of those who wrote its words. To drift through its history is to see wizarding world itself, in all its flaws and strengths, bound into parchment and carried by voices in chambers of power. The statute of secrecy endures still, centuries after it was signed. It remains proof of both wisdom and retreat, act that preserved magic by hiding it, that allowed witches and wizards to survive even as it walled them away from world they once shared. The Wizengamot still gathers, its verdicts echoing with both justice and politics. The departments of the ministry still regulate, still enforce, still repair accidents, and conceal truths. Each carries weight of tradition, yet each also carries chance to change, to bend slowly toward greater fairness. The legacy of wizarding law is not final, for law is never finished. It bends with time, reshaped by new voices, challenged by new struggles. What once seemed permanent, the servitude of house elves, the exclusion of goblins, the branding of werewolves, is questioned now, its fairness doubted, its endurance uncertain, and in those questions lies hope. For to doubt law is to seek better one. To challenge prejudice is to open path for progress. The ministry itself remains imperfect. It will falter again, for all institutions do. It will face corruption, it will bend beneath fear, it will reflect the flaws of those who lead it, but it will also rise again, rebuilt by those who refuse silence, guided by those who remember that justice must be shield, not chain. Its history teaches that progress is slow, uneven, and often fragile. Yet it also teaches that even after betrayal, after corruption, after fall into tyranny, law can be remade and trust can be rebuilt. The question rests gently: what is wizarding law at its heart? Is it final word of authority or living mirror of society's choices? Perhaps it is both, for law is not stone, but river, carrying reflections of every age. Its fairness is never fixed, but always pursued, shaped by courage of those willing to challenge it, and by fear of those who resist change. In this imagining, we leave the atrium of the ministry. Fireplaces glow, memos drift like paper birds, and footsteps echo down polished stone corridors. Above, London bustles unaware, Muggles hurrying through their lives, never knowing that beneath them lies government of hidden world. The golden fountain gleams once more. Wizard, witch, goblin, centaur, and elf standing together in symbol that promises more than history has ever delivered. Yet the promise remains, fragile but enduring, that one day law may reflect not prejudice but true justice.